Um, like you said, I grew up in Hamburg, Germany, post-war generation. And so as we grew up, we had a lot of questions of my parents, which were sometimes answered satisfactorily, many times not. And so I'm going to start with a poem that deals with that. It's a pantoum, and that is slightly off the traditional form. Silenced. Okay. Close the door, the mantra I remember. The adults of my childhood demanded not to allow the warmth to flee in those ice-crackling post-war winters. The adults of my childhood demanded nothing, kept their silence in those ice-crackling post-war winters, a tall brown tile oven warming us. Demanding nothing, they kept their silence behind closed doors, lace-shrouded panes, a tall brown tile oven warming us. Did they feel shame, regret, behind closed doors, lace-shrouded panes? Walls shifted, cramped, confinement. Did they feel shame? Was it regret that made them turn their faces? Walls shifted, cramped, confinement. I yearned for air, exoneration that made them turn their faces, kept doors shut still when summers bloomed. I yearned for air, exoneration that never came, doors still closed when summers bloom, not to allow their truth to flee. Thank you. So I'm skipping to leaving Hamburg, and I wanted to see the distance between where I was from and where I was going. Had never planned to stay here, but here I am 50-some years later. And this was the very beginning. Coal Harbor, 1965. Dusk presses onto the harbor, wet snow, heavy flakes melt into the black river, brush the sooty quay, the deck of the tethered freighter. Gently, my brothers carry my sea chest up the gangplank, reluctance in their step. My friends are there with gifts and champagne. Our laughter trails off into the dark. My mother, wordless by my side, folds herself into a winter coat, slips deep into the upturned sheepskin collar. Our eyes avoid each other. My father bustles, taking care of what needs taking care of, smiling, staying close. Our elbows, hands graze here and there, afraid to hold on tight. The ship's horn, like a knife edge, slices through us, severs our touch. I shiver at the icy railing, watch them step back down the frost-glazed gangway. The engines growl, awake now, deep inside the old ship's belly. Thank you. Now I'm jumping way ahead past a very long marriage to the time where it broke up, and a little event that happened at that time called Duet. Splintered by his betrayal, I roam the hills above our home in fading night's dimness. Trails wind muddy through chaparral choke, beaten down and sodden. A raw rain slams me sideways. Even the rattlesnakes are hiding. I lift my face and howl into the press of clouds, and there, out of the gloom, an answer. Close behind, on low rise, stands the coyote, his nose pointed up into the liquid air, his wail responds to mine. And for some moments, our lament a song, just he and I, as dawn breaks and the rain keeps falling. Yeah. So after I was on my own for a while, I had a relationship with a guy in Alaska and went up there a lot, which was great. I love that place. So this is part of that. Delphiniums. One spring, when winter ceded its grasp, we planted them next to the porch of your brown house, tucked into a copse of budding birches, delphiniums. The plants, at first so tender, reached towards the Alaska sun of summer, tall spires of cobalt, purple, indigo, and shunned by moose nibbling the flowers in the window box instead. We watched them grow stronger year by year, a drift of blues beside your door. And now that we no longer watch together, are they still blooming there, reminding you of me? Or did you tear them from their soil when we tore us apart? My son, whose birthday it is today, lives in London, and he's lived for several years in Dubai. And I used to visit him there, and contrary to what I thought, I actually liked the place a lot. And I really fell in love with the Burj Khalifa, the tallest building in the world at 2,722 feet. So this is a little ode to that. Burj Khalifa, Dubai. The silver spire pierces the heavens in search of God, or is it a dazzling monument to exuberance and vision, sheer joy, slender, oh so slender, spun up and up into the burning blade of desert sky? And the night's indigo dome lights jewel the mirrored plains, but I love its ethereal mantle and day's rippling heat, the lightness as if itself of shimmered air. And another one from the Middle Eastern that was published in that Middle Eastern magazine. Bahrain had an uprising of the Shia a few years back, if you remember, and because they have a Sunni government, minority Sunni government, oppressing the Shia, and there were big protests, and they were kind of brutally suppressed. And after that, they keep on going in this way. Shouts in the dark. The muezzin's last note of Isha drifts over the flat roofs of Bahrain, melts away into humid dusk. One by one, they climb the steps up to the summit of their homes, these protesters of Pearl Square. Bullets drive them back into their dusky shelters. They bolt their gates, but cloaked in a mantle of pitch, shadows, and purple darkness, they cup their hands, call out to one another, rooftop to rooftop. Their defiant voices rise and fall across the city of Manama. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Spring blossoms in desert night, fragrance of jasmine, the bellow of lions. When my son leaves, it's always sort of a sad moment because I don't get to see him that often. And usually I take him to the train station, he goes down, sees his father, and then takes the plane back from there. This is Coast Starlight. We all know what that is, right? There's always this moment. The station's platform speckled with chewing gum and seagull droppings. The still distant keening of the train. Rails glisten and hum, wisps of grass part the shale. Standing close, we ward off absence. Till soon, be safe, I love you. And then it is there, looming silver and blue in an exhale of brakes. Doors yawn open, swallow my son, wheeze shut behind him. A wave, and I turn into the day ahead. Thank you. My mother died a couple of years ago at age 98, and I feel extremely lucky that to the very end she was very sharp, and you could have real conversations with her. So I write a fair amount about her, and the next couple of poems deal with her, are with her, about her. Before everything. In a photograph of my mother, black and white, taken by my father in their early days, she stands in a meadow on top of a hill at the apex of her youth. A narrow skirt hugs her slim hips. I imagine it blue, blue like the sky above her. Her hair, dark and curly, held back in a twist. She's beautiful. Summer clouds swell behind her, one hand raised to shield her eyes. What did she see? What lifescape stretched out before her? Now the layered years weigh down her brittle bones, earthbound. Folded into her chair, a rose sweater droops off her reed-sharp shoulders. What do you see? What do you feel, I ask? It is time, she says. Wonder to have reached this gate still closed. And yes, curiosity. She smiles as her brown-flecked hands smooth the linen cloth in her lap. My mother's pearls pour through my fingers, the smallest hardly bigger than the grain of sand at its nucleus. Nacreous, moon-pale, blushed peach, warm luster seeded in ocean's chill waters, oysters, craggy shells. Their burnished spheres hold evening's candle glow, my mother's laughter round her sun-darkened skin like a wreath of luminant stars. The area around Hamburg behind the dike is all food growing. It's a big orchards, mostly apples, and I happen to love apples. So this place that the poem is about is very special. It's about 3 acres, and they're all old sorts that they don't do commercially at all. And the farmer allows anybody to go there and pick and taste, and the only requirement is that you don't pick more than 25 kilos so that everybody else has some too. So this is about that. Haseldorf is the name of that little village. A gate blocks the road. Ahead, our path flows through the meadowlands behind the dike. Sheep call in throaty bleats. A surge of starlings wheels into the dusking sky. Low tide muddies the river arm beside us. We climb the stile into the orchard's apple-ripe air. Rows of gnarled trees, limbs bowed, offer the burden of autumn fruit. Herbstrenette, Finkenwerder Prinz, Perle von Angeln, almost forgotten names like a song. A farmer's passion to halt extinction, his gift to us, these globes of vermilion, lime and gold, speckled and burgundy striped. Here patches of rough skin promise sweetness. We pick and taste till darkness slips into the trees, heavy with the honeyed ferment of fallen fruit. Thank you. I just got back from Pennsylvania a couple nights ago and visiting a friend there, and I was struck again. It is so green. They had so much rain this spring and up till now that everything is like a jungle. And it sort of reminded me of, what we are lacking. So I added this poem to this reading. Thirsting. Parched earth opens, rain falls, quavering sheets of like liquid auroras, all day, all night, quenching the longing soil, till this morning's moist breath stills trees and shrubs. Each leaf, each blade clings to the drops jeweling the edges, as if the slightest stirring would tumble them back into dust. And speaking of dry weather and all, some of you know that I lost my house and everything in it, basically, in the tea fire. And it was threatened in the Thomas fire. It stopped like 280 feet from my house. So this time around, I was lucky. And I have a chapbook coming out late this winter, or early this winter, actually, with all my fire poems. And this is one of the poems from that book. Fire weather. Kiln hot all day. A wind like dragon's breath blisters off the mountain, razzles the dry grass, flogs the parched shrub. I'm restless, uneasy. And then a call, my daughter's urgent voice. Fire is coming. We left. Leave, please, Mom. You have to leave now. And as if a curtain lifts, I am aware of distant sirens, the bite of smoke, my stomach clenches. I have been afraid, on the freighter carving across the storm-churned Atlantic, when my love of ocean's vast wildness, unseen in darkness, shifted to fear, as the feral sea tossed us like a stick. Or when caught above the tree line high in the mountains and lightning scissored around us. But this is different. A scramble, I can't think what was my plan for just such an occasion. The urge to flee, my heart races, my mouth husk dry. A gulp of water, animals to cars, the dog's willing, and so is Boo, the timid cat that never ventures far, but where's Spook the roamer? My grandma's clock, photos, I sweep frames off shelves and grab the trunk that holds a jumble, old Navajo rugs, my artwork, and a stack of chocolate bars there on the counter. All else left behind. Flight, the road deserted, air crackles, sparks reel high, and from the east the monster races towards us. As if my glance would tease it closer, I look away until, next to my daughter and my grandson, safe off the mountain, we watch in silence as looming flames shroud her home and mine. And my last couple of poems, you all know about the debris flow in Montecito, and I wrote this shortly after that. Pear blossoms. First came the fire, then unbound the water's torrent, the boulders crush. Now 3 weeks past, the pear trees burst of snowy blossoms tremble above the suck of mud. White petals float on the wind's sigh as if to soothe and veil the little girl still lost. Shroud the boy, barely grown into a man. Where did it take them? Rock pinned, root trapped. Will earth someday relinquish the orphaned bones? And I'll end on a lighter note, not so much for the subject of this poem, but for me at least. A gnat. Curled in my leather chair, I relish a poem about wilderness, while a midget of a fly nags my face, nearly inhaled on the tide of my breath. Incessant wheeze around my head, I purse my lips, huff it away, sniffle to rocket it off. Still, it persists. Now lights on the page. I slam the book shut. And there it is now, right between huckleberries and bears, flattened, a spread-winged black dot like a tiny crucifix pointed at me. Thank you.